Hello, good afternoon, Facebook. How's it going? Today in this video, we are live and we're going to be talking about ways to be a coastal steward. And I'll be getting into that in just a moment. But if we've never met, my name is Carly. I work with the North Coast Regional Land Trust, and most of my work focuses on community stewardship and engagement. So I'm so excited to have you here today. And we are going to be talking a little bit about invasive plants, what they are, why we should care about them, and then we'll talk a little bit about strategies for removing them when we find them in some of our outdoor spaces. But first, if you are tuning in live, or even if you're watching the rebroadcast, go ahead and leave me a comment in the comment box and tell me where you are watching live from. I'd love to hear where everyone is watching from while you're sheltering in place, and I'm so thankful to be able to connect with you virtually. So let's dive in. As you know, the North Coast Regional Land Trust has had to postpone a lot of our April events in light of shelter-in-place mandates across the state of California. But we're hopeful that this is an opportunity to continue engaging people safely in the outdoors. And this is our first event, so thanks for joining. So let's see, what are invasive plants? Invasive plants are plants that did not naturally grow and evolve to be in a place. And they were oftentimes introduced intentionally or unintentionally. Sometimes it was a really pretty plant for the garden, so people planted it. Other times it was brought over in ships. And then kind of proliferated. And so invasive plants are non-native plants that can rapidly spread and proliferate in an area. And when they do, they cause a lot of harm. They can cause ecological harm. They can cause harm to humans and livestock health. So there are a lot of reasons why invasive plants can be harmful. And I'm going to talk about just two of them. And so one of the first reasons why we should care about invasive plants is because they can really disrupt the ecosystem, and they can cause a lot of harm and reduce species diversity, right? So let's think of a insect and a pollinator that most of us know, the monarch butterfly, right? And so the monarch butterfly, we see it oftentimes laying its eggs, actually we see it exclusively laying its eggs on milkweed, a plant that it has naturally evolved with over many, many years, right? So it's evolved with milkweed, which allows it to it lays its eggs on the milkweed, and it also eats the milkweed. And so when the little caterpillar babies hatch out of the mom's eggs, they'll go ahead and eat that milkweed. And so what happens, let's imagine we were butterflies and we were fluttering around, and we find a whole field of milkweed. That is amazing if you're a monarch butterfly, because that means that's somewhere you can lay your eggs, and you know that your eggs are going to hatch and have lots of yummy food to eat, okay? So let's imagine we're that same butterfly, and instead of passing a field of of milkweed, we pass a field of entirely taken over by invasives, right? So no more milkweed. We see maybe English ivy in that field. What that means for us, we got two options as a monarch butterfly. Our first option is we can try to keep flying. We can fly away, right, and see, maybe we'll be able to find some milkweed somewhere else. The other option is we lay our eggs there, but ultimately the babies, the caterpillar babies, will hatch. They will have no food to eat because they cannot eat the English ivy example of an invasive plant. And unfortunately, they will ultimately end up dying. And so that is just one of many examples of how native plants and animals have evolved together and are dependent on each other, and why invasive plants can be so disruptive, right? So when an invasive plant comes in and it outcompetes that native plant, we lose a lot of the diversity that exists in our natural areas. The other reason, one reason, so there are so many reasons why invasive plants are harmful, but it can diminish recreational access. So if you're thinking about that, and for all my Humboldt people, right, you might have walked out at Freshwater Farms Reserve along the nature trail, and along the trail you might see some invasive Himalayan blackberry. And so that is problematic, right? Because if that invasive Himalayan blackberry went unmanaged, if we didn't manage that along the side of the nature trail, it would take over the nature trail and reduce public access. So that's just one other reason why invasive plants can be harmful, right? And there are many more. So if I didn't list one that you are really interested in sharing with everyone, please leave a comment in the comment box. I would love to share all the information about invasives that we can. So I've talked a little bit about what invasive plants are, why we should care about them, and now I'm actually going to spend the remainder of the time talking about some strategies for how you can safely remove an invasive plant. The invasive plant of the day is this one. And so this is English ivy. English ivy is an invasive plant that we see common. It's a perennial woody vine, and you'll see these kind of like green leaf, nice green leaves like that. And there can actually be, it can have a little bit of darker leaves sometimes. I'm going to put the camera down so you guys can see. So here is English ivy. It looks a little bit different. It's a little darker green, and this other green. But so that's what it looks like when you see it on the ground. It looks kind of like that. English ivy, not only can it be growing on the ground as a vine, but it does really well climbing. This vine enables it to climb up things. And I don't have a great example right here for you all, but it can wrap itself around trees, scale a tree. It can definitely get into fences and disrupt the fence line. So it's one of those that if you see it, you definitely want to deal with this one quick. And there's a couple reasons why, right? So if it's actually so strong and gets so big that it wraps so strongly around a tree, and it can girdle a tree, it can cause the tree to end up dying and falling over and becoming a hazard for people, which is something we want to avoid. And also it adds a lot of weight. So this doesn't look like much, but if you can imagine a ton of this wrapped around a tree, that can actually, in a heavy windstorm, put unintended weight on a tree and cause it to topple over, have some branches fall, which is of course a huge safety hazard. So this is a plant that we're worried about. I like to call it the boa constrictor of invasive plants. Can I call it that? I'm going to. If you have ever seen one of these wrap around a tree, you'll know why I'm calling it a boa constrictor. So we know what it is, we know what it looks like, and I want to talk a bit about how we can get rid of it, because there are a lot of ways for getting rid of it, and let's get started with that. So I'm going to go ahead and set you guys down so that you can see where I'm going to be working, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can best remove this, right? Okay, so you guys can't see me right there. You guys, some of the things you'll definitely need if you're going to be trying to remove some English ivy: gloves. You know, gloves are the #1 thing. They're going to protect your hands while you're pulling out this vine. Fortunately, English ivy doesn't have any needles or thorns or anything to really poke you, which is great, but I always recommend having gloves, right? And so while we're all sheltering in place, I totally acknowledge that not all of us have tools at our disposal. But if you do have some tools, some of the things that I would really recommend are going to be a little trowel. If you have like just some smaller English ivy, some loppers. Let's see. Try to be kind of safe while I handle those. Loppers will be great if the English ivy is up in a tree and you need to kind of cut some of it down. And then the other thing I recommend here is just a nice grubbing tool, a shovel of sorts. This is just kind of a tree planting shovel. But a regular shovel would work, a McLeod, anything that can grub out the kind of bulb of this vine will be really helpful when you're removing it, okay? And so, best way to remove English ivy is to pull it. So I'm gonna put my gloves on like this. Oh, Katrina says, I like to use gloves and long sleeves with English ivy. Yes. She said that it can irritate the skin. I have found that some people feel like they get some irritation pulling English ivy, and definitely whenever you're doing garden work or yard work or you're outside using long sleeves. I got my long sleeves on today for just that reason. Thank you, Christina. And if anyone has any other tips or techniques that they use when they're trying to pull some invasive plants, please put them in the comment box. I'd love to share that with people. So I'm gonna walk over there. I'm gonna pull a little bit of it and just talk you through my process for that. And so I walk over, right? I see that there's the English ivy and I start pulling, right? I start pulling the English ivy, and what I notice is it's actually this long vine. Look how long this thing is. And it's going all the way back to the fence line. It's going past the fence line. So I'm gonna do my best to get as far as I can with it. And I'm just pulling. And so I pulled that out. You can see I didn't get the whole bulb, right? I didn't get the root of the plant. I wanna be getting that root whenever possible. But I'm confined, right, by this fence, so I can get as far as I can. And so that's what I would do, right? I would come out here, I would keep pulling these as far as I can. Ideally, you can get to the root of the plant and you can use some of those grubbing tools that I showed you to get it out. But what I then do is I kind of wrap it. I like to wrap the English ivy like this. And you put that, you just go ahead, put that in a pile right here. And for disposal, you can go ahead and leave it in a pile. I like to, for this demonstration, I didn't grab it, but if I'm ever removing English ivy, I like to get a tarp, and I'll put any of the pulled ivy, I'll put that in the tarp so that it, you know, the runners can't spread, and we reduce the potential for continuing to spread that English ivy. You can go ahead, you can take that to a waste disposal site, you can allow it to compost. And then one of the other ways I wanted to share with you all is the English ivy that I was just pulling was on the ground, but like I said, English ivy is really good at climbing trees, at scaling trees, and so loppers are gonna be a great tool here. I'm gonna go ahead and set you guys down and give you a little demo on how to remove using the loppers, right? So if you've got loppers and you also have a tree, let's say that English ivy was working its way up this tree, one of the best efforts there would be to cut. You want to cut the English ivy around the base of the tree. Be careful when working with loppers. Try not to go above your head when you're cutting with loppers. Things can become overhead hazards, so just being mindful when you're using those tools. But what's great about that is you've cut around the base of the tree, killing the ivy that's scaling the tree. Pull as much as you can from like whatever's in arm's reach, and then what will actually happen is a lot of the English ivy will end up dying, and it becomes a lot easier to pull it out from above, or sometimes it'll naturally fall just because it's dead at that point and it's not really wrapping around the tree so much. So those are a couple ways to think about manual removal of English ivy, whether you're dealing with it on the ground, whether you're dealing with it in a tree. And you know, one thing I didn't cover is where would you find English ivy? And maybe the better question is, where would you not find English ivy? You can find English ivy in Humboldt County and definitely Northern California, pretty much anywhere, in a park, in your garden space. This was in my backyard right here. I have English ivy growing in my backyard. I didn't even know that existed, but it made it possible for me to do this video. But it is a really prolific invasive plant, can definitely be harmful and overtake a lot of areas otherwise. So I'm seeing a lot of people joining on. Oh, my uncle, shout out David Drenick. How's it going? Deja. And so I shared a few tips there about removal. And once you've removed it, what you can do with it, right? Think about a tarp. Think about letting it compost in place or taking it to the green waste. And so there's a couple ways that you can start dealing with English ivy in any of your outdoor spaces. And I hope that during this time of shelter in place, you are, oh, thank you, Deja. Deja says, thanks for the fantastic demo. So I hope that while you are sheltering in place, you are still finding some time to get out in whatever green space is available to you, whether that's a backyard, whether that's your local forest or park. You know, these spaces are out there. Please be safe when you're doing so, and hopefully you can find and remove some English ivy. So go ahead and please comment in the comment box and let me know if you have any other strategies and tips. I'd love to hear from you. And I am so thankful that you came to our first Connect with the Outdoors series for the month of April. Next Tuesday at 1 is going to be Nature Story Time with Skylar, who is NRLT's intern, and she's really excited. This one would be a great one for the kiddos. So until next time, be well and see you soon.